Excellent!
What's up guys, how's it going, and welcome to my monthly builds video for February 2019. Every month at the beginning of the month I do a couple parts lists for you guys at home who might be building your own computer, especially if you're doing it for the first time. Choosing the parts to put in the PC is usually the first thing you need to figure out. If you're looking for a video where I actually put a PC together, check out my builds playlist. I will link that in the video's description. And of course, every month I ask you guys for your feedback on what builds I should put together for the next month. So last month I asked you what you want to see in February. The winner was $1,500. All I was asking for was price points last month. Close runner-up was the $400 price point. Don't worry, I've actually got 3 builds for you guys today at 3 different price points, and I think you'll be happy with them. But also don't forget to vote for next month's builds. Straw polls linked in the description, and I tried to give you guys some more abstract or potentially different types of build options there, like an audio or a video PC or other options. Check it out. Before I dive into the parts list though, in an unprecedented act of foresight, I actually have already assembled actually all the systems that I'm going to be talking about today, and I am putting together a new updated how to build a PC guide for 2019 where I assemble the systems, including an intro video where I talk about the theory of what parts are what and what they do, hopefully just to give you guys more confidence as you're choosing your own parts to build your own PC. That said though, let's dive into today's builds. I have 3 of them, starting with a less than $500 gaming PC. For starters, coming in at about $480 right now. We have an upgrade to that PC, which is going to come in at about $900, upgrading to a discrete graphics card, actually about $882 as of today's pricing. And then of course the $1,500 build as requested with an Intel processor. This is going to be a really high-end system, coming in actually just a little over $1,500, but I'll explain how I came to those decisions when I get to that build. So here's the sub $500 gaming PC, and this one is featuring the Ryzen 3 2200G, which is an APU, which means it's got a quad-core, 4-core, 4-thread processor, as well as integrated Vega graphics. So that means you can get away without having a graphics card. This is perfectly fine for gaming at 1080p. Of course, you're going to get a nice benefit by upgrading the processor and the graphics card in the future, which you can do, but before we get into that, let's talk about the rest of the parts. For the motherboard, I'm still recommending this MSI Arsenal Gaming B450 Tomahawk, which comes in at usually about $105 to $115. It is an AM4 socket motherboard. It has 4 memory slots, and it actually has pretty decent power delivery, so you can start out with a low-end entry-level CPU like the sub $100 2200G, and then you could potentially upgrade to something else in the future, and the motherboard will still be able to handle it. There aren't a lot of fancy bells and whistles on this board, but it does have video outs at the back, so it will work with an APU. Memory prices thankfully have come way down. When you're talking about a Ryzen system, you want to make sure you have compatible memory and also faster memory. 3000 or 3200 speed is what I usually go for. This is a 16 gig kit, 2x8 gigs, and you can get it for about $115. That's a solid option. And the Ripjaws 5, you know, it's all black, no fancy RGB or anything, but it's going to match with most builds. For storage right now, for just about anyone, you should spend about $50 on a 2.5-inch SSD. And you can get quite a few at that range. You can spend a few dollars more on one that maybe is a little bit faster. This Team L5 Lite is definitely pretty entry level. There's nothing too crazy or fancy about it. It does have a black housing, so you could remove the sticker if you wanted to actually put it on display, but chances are you're going to tuck it away back in the case somewhere, and then it will just function as an SSD. $50. 500 gig SSD, that's what most people should be going for any build right now. For the case, I actually have my editor Joe go to Micro Center and pick out the cases so I wouldn't be tainted by my prior knowledge of cases. I told him to get about a $60 to $80 case for this entry-level build. He chose the Masterbox Lite 5 RGB because that's what they had at Micro Center. It's about $70. You can actually get it without the RGB for about $5 less than this, but with the RGB version it actually comes with 4 case fans, 3 in the front and 1 in the back, so like you're totally fine for airflow. They're not crazy fancy fans or anything, but I've already built in this case and it's perfectly adequate. A good deal for about $65. For a power supply in this range, you should be looking for an 80 plus bronze rated unit, and I recommend about a 550 watt power supply. You can go a little bit higher than that if you want, but thanks to the rebate on this one, you can get it for $40. It's a Corsair power supply, so it's well built. It's partially modular, so you can remove the cables if you're not going to use them, and the cables themselves are all black. Those are kind of all the basics that you want in a power supply. $40, you should be able to get a good deal on that. So assemble those 6 components. You're coming in at less than $500. I think you're off and running with a very solid gaming PC, and you could potentially upgrade it. So moving on to the upgraded version, this one's about $900, and this one we've upgraded the CPU to a Ryzen 5 2600, so you're going from a 4-core 4-thread processor to a 6-core 12-thread processor, since this one does have SMT enabled. And this CPU is usually $165, but you can actually get it for $150 from Amazon right now apparently, which is a great deal. And if you're trying to compare it to other CPUs that you might get in this range, I feel like the next step up would be the 2600X. That's $50 $50 more though. Beyond that, you could look at something like a 1700X, which gives you more cores and threads. But XFR with the 2000 series of Ryzen processors, or extended frequency range, kind of the automatic overclocking, works a little bit better, and single core performance is going to get you better gaming performance overall. So that's why I tend to lean towards the 2000 series CPUs, especially with this deal on the 2600. The one drawback for the 2600 is it comes with the Wraith Stealth Cooler, which is a little bit smaller. It's not going to be as good for overclocking in the future, so you might consider upgrading that down the line. You could easily get something like a Hyper 212 to drop in there instead, and you'd have much better cooling performance and maybe get yourself a little bit more overclocking too. Now the 2600 is not an APU. It does not have integrated graphics, so we need a graphics card as well, and the RTX 2060 from NVIDIA is the best bang for the buck at about a $350 price point right now. There's even some price wars going on that are taking them down to a few dollars less than $350, but an aftermarket version like this one from Gigabyte is going to be a solid choice for you, unless you want to, of course, upgrade it. I will admit that when I actually built this system, I totally had a brain fart and I installed the wrong graphics card. It's got an RTX 2080 in it right now, so stay tuned for the video where I sort of explain how I got that wrong. And of course, with any graphics card like this, it's easy to swap in or swap out, so you could put an RTX 2080 with this build, but this is probably a little bit more suited for the high-end Intel build that I'm going to show you next. So here's the $1,500 build. I went with an i7-8700K rather than the 9000 series simply because it's a little bit less expensive at $360, and it has hyper-threading, so you get 6 cores and 12 threads. If you compare this to like the 9700K, it is an 8-core processor, but it's about $50 more, and it doesn't have hyper-threading, and in either case, you're going to need an aftermarket CPU cooler as well. More on that in just a second, but I also want to point out that with this price at $1,500, this is with an RTX 2070, which you can get for about $500 right now. If you were to upgrade that to an RTX 2080, you'd want to get an aftermarket version that you could get for about $700, and it would raise the entire price of this build up to about $1,700, which is totally up to you. It's just a matter if you want to spend an extra $200 for a bit more graphics performance. But let's go over the parts individually. We have the i7-8700K, which you can get for about $360 right now on Amazon. You probably do want to reality check the prices on the 9700K before you drop your cash on this. The 9700K is going for about $410 right now. So I think for a $50 savings, the 8700K is worth it, and you'll get about equivalent gaming performance, especially if you overclock the 8700K, which you should be able to do because I've dropped in an aftermarket all-in-one liquid cooler. Any aftermarket 240mm all-in-one liquid CPU cooler that costs around $100 should serve you just fine here, as long as it's well reviewed, of course. Make sure it's not one of those budget variants. I have used this specific cooler before, and it comes with, you know, some fancy addressable RGB LEDs and everything. It's a good cooler, so that's why I chose it. I totally forgot to point out this is a Mini-ITX build, but this is a Mini-ITX build. I wanted to make this one a little bit different since it is a little bit higher end. So I chose this motherboard, the Asus ROG Strix Z390-i Gaming. This is about a $200 motherboard. It's very small, but it packs a lot of features. Like you get both addressable and non-addressable RGB LED headers. You get a USB 3.1 Gen 2 front panel connector. You get dual M.2 slots, one on the front that has a heatsink, as well as one on the back, and it's got a fixed I/O shield, which I really like. For memory, I was trying to keep some parity between this build and the less expensive one, so still have 16 gigs, 2x8 gig sticks, DDR4 3200 memory, but I went with the Team Nighthawk memory, which is fancy and includes RGB lighting, so you're spending about an extra $15 for that fancy RGB lighting and look, but it's a fancier higher end build, so that's why I chose that. I still stuck with a 500 gig $50 SATA SSD for this build, although I was very torn between that and spending something like $30 more or so on a 500 gig NVMe SSD that might have much faster read and write speeds. In the end, I was trying to hit the $1,500 price point, so that's why I decided to go with what I did, but definitely keep NVMe SSDs in mind because they will be a little bit faster for you. For a graphics card, I went with the GeForce RTX 2070 8 gig gaming. These should cost about $500, but you can get it on sale right now, 10% off at Newegg. This is an aftermarket card from Gigabyte with a triple fan cooler, and for about $500, it's hard to get anything better than this at the moment. Rounding things out, our case is the NZXT H200i, which is a little on the large size for a Mini-ITX case, but only about $130, so for a nicer case, it's not going in the $150 or $200 range. It's also well designed, well built, it's not terribly difficult to build in, and it looks pretty cool. This is the white version. Finally, for a power supply, the EVGA Supernova G3, and this is pretty much the same as the less expensive build's power supply. It's just 650 watts instead of 550, 80 plus gold certified instead of bronze. It is fully modular rather than partially modular, and for all of those upgraded features, you're probably going to spend about 30 or 40 bucks more. So you should be able to find this for about $70. So guys, that's my monthly builds video for February 2019, and whether you want to spend 500 bucks, 900 bucks, 1,500 bucks or more, pick your poison. Hopefully these builds lists help you choose the parts that you want to use, and of course feel free to swap things out and make it more personalized to you if you so desire. And of course stay tuned for my 3-part series on how to build a PC, which is coming out like very soon. Thank you again for watching this video. Hit the thumbs up button on your way out. We'll see you guys next time.